Hello and welcome. In today's discussion, we'll be tackling a critical issue affecting Nigeria's stability, the proliferation of small arms and light weapons. Uncontrolled access to small arms and light weapons poses a grave threat to Nigeria's national security, fueling violence, terrorism, and organized crime. We'll explore the causes and implications of proliferation and discuss the strategies, including policy recommendations, to curb this growing threat. If you find this topic important, smash the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss future videos. Also, share this podcast as security is everyone's responsibility. Let's get started.
Sometimes a story just gets under your skin and you can't stop thinking about it. That's kind of how I feel about what's happening in Nigeria.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those situations that's easy to overlook when you just see the headlines.
Exactly. Like we hear about Boko Haram, banditry, ethnic clashes. But what we don't always hear about is the sheer amount of weapons just fueling all of it.
It's mind-boggling, really. This report we're digging into uses the term awash to describe the amount of small arms and light weapons in Nigeria, and they aren't exaggerating.
Awash.
Yeah.
Like, wow, we're talking handguns, right?
Oh, way beyond handguns. Think military grade. AKs, machine guns, RPGs, not even grenades are readily available.
See, that's the part that really gets me. It's like conflict is always going to be a part of the human story, sadly. But easy access to that level of firepower just changes the game completely.
100%. And what's really fascinating is how this issue connects back to other major global events. Think back to the civil wars in Liberia and Sierra Leone, for example.
Right, those were devastating.
Absolutely. And those conflicts left behind huge stockpiles of weapons. And then you have the fall of Gaddafi in Libya, again, unguarded arsenals just flooding the market.
And all those weapons just disappear.
Well, not exactly. This report does a great job tracing the path of these weapons, and a significant chunk ended up in Nigeria.
Wow, so we're talking about porous borders being a major issue here.
Huge factor. Imagine trying to patrol hundreds of kilometers of dense forest remote villages.
Yeah.
It's incredibly difficult to control.
It's like trying to secure a house with no walls.
Exactly. So you have this legacy of conflict in other countries directly contributing to the struggles Nigeria is facing today.
It's a connection you don't often hear about, but it makes perfect sense.
It really highlights just how interconnected these global security issues really are. But here's where the report gets really interesting. It goes beyond just the supply and dives into why the demand for these weapons is so high within Nigeria.
Okay, so this is where we get into the really complex stuff. It's got to be more than just those conflicts we mentioned earlier, right?
You're right on the money. See, the report argues that the spread of all these weapons is both a symptom and a cause of Nigeria's security crisis. It's a vicious cycle.
Okay, I'm going to need you to break that down a bit. Give me an example.
Sure. Take the farmer-herder clashes in the north, for example. A lot of that stems from dwindling resources, desertification, pushing people into closer proximity.
Right, I've read about that.
So as competition for land and water increases, both sides feel like they need to arm up to protect themselves. It's a recipe for disaster.
So you have a problem exacerbated by climate change, which then fuels the demand for more weapons. It's like, where does it end?
It's a tough cycle to break. And then you layer on top of that the issue of political violence.
Right, because that's always a recipe for peace and stability.
The report actually calls out how politicians will arm up groups of people around election time.
Oh, sure, too. Maintain peace and order during the election.
Of course. But then those weapons rarely just vanish after the election's over. They filter back into the black market, ready for the next conflict or to arm criminal gangs.
It's like trying to stop a flood. You might dam up one river, but the water's just going to find another way through.
A perfect analogy. But this isn't just about large armed groups or political maneuvering. The report does a really good job of bringing it down to a human level and looking at the impact on everyday Nigerians.
Yeah. I mean, it goes without saying that just living in a conflict zone is dangerous enough, but it sounds like it goes even deeper than that.
Imagine being a farmer, too terrified to go work your fields because of bandits, or a shop owner who has to close down because of kidnappings. This constant fear just cripples the economy.
So it's a tragedy on multiple levels. You have the immediate violence, of course, but then this long-term erosion of any sense of security, of hope even.
Exactly. And sadly, it creates this environment where even ordinary citizens feel like they need a gun just to survive.
It becomes survival of the most heavily armed, which is a heartbreaking situation for millions of people.
It really is.
Okay, so we've laid out the scope of this problem. It's huge, it's complex, and it's interconnected with so many other issues. But I have to imagine there are things that can be done to address it right. It can't just be a descent into chaos with no way out. It can't just be a descent into chaos with no way out.
You're right. There has to be some way forward. And the good news is this report doesn't just lay out the problem. It actually offers a roadmap for tackling this crisis. But it starts by acknowledging that this isn't a problem with one simple solution.
No magic wand, huh?
I'm afraid not. But the report does highlight some really promising strategies. One key aspect is strengthening border security. But as we talked about earlier, Nigeria's borders are vast and incredibly porous.
Yeah, it's not as easy as just, building a wall.
Not at all. The report gets into the specifics, suggesting better surveillance tech, increased cooperation with neighboring countries, and crucially, making sure those who are patrolling the borders have the resources and training they need to be effective.
Right, because you can have the best intentions in the world, but if you're working with outdated equipment and your teams are stretched thin, it's an uphill battle from the start.
Exactly. And then alongside trying to stem the flow of NEW weapons coming in, you have to address the ones already in circulation. That's where disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration programs come in. We call them DDR programs for short.
Okay, yeah, I've heard that term before, DDR. But how do those actually work? Is it really as simple as just convincing people to hand over their guns?
It's definitely more nuanced than that. This report highlights some successful DDR programs in other countries, and one of the key elements is offering vocational training that's actually tailored to the local job market, like teaching people to be mechanics, carpenters, things like that.
Oh, interesting. So it's not just, here's some money, give us your gun. It's about giving people viable alternatives, a way to provide for themselves and their families without having to resort to violence.
Exactly. It's about showing them a different path. But alongside those economic incentives, the report also stresses how important it is to address the root causes that drive people to join armed groups in the first place. We can't just ignore that aspect.
Right, because if we don't address those underlying issues, any solution is just going to be a Band-Aid on a much deeper wound. So we're talking about those root causes we touched on earlier: poverty, lack of opportunity, that sense of desperation.
Exactly. The report is very clear. Without tackling these issues head-on, any other efforts are going to be limited in their effectiveness.
So what are some concrete steps that can be taken in that arena? It seems like such a massive undertaking.
It is a massive challenge requiring a multi-pronged approach. We're talking about investing in education, creating job training programs, improving access to healthcare, strengthening social safety nets so people aren't constantly on the brink. It's about creating a society where picking up a gun is no longer seen as the solution, or even a viable option.
Right, because if you can provide people with a genuine sense of hope, a belief that their lives can be better, that's a powerful deterrent. But it sounds like a long-term strategy, not a quick fix.
You're absolutely right. Building a more stable and prosperous Nigeria is going to take a sustained effort and a commitment from every level of society. But what's important to remember is that this isn't just about internal action. The report really emphasizes that this is a global issue that demands global cooperation.
So this is where the international community needs to step up and play a part.
Exactly. And it goes back to that idea of shared responsibility we were talking about. Remember how we talked about the flow of weapons from other conflicts? This is a perfect example of why international cooperation on arms control is so crucial.
So like cracking down on the illegal arms trade, making it harder for these weapons to cross borders in the first place.
Exactly. But it's not just about cutting off the supply. This report also highlights how important it is to support those DDR programs we were discussing, providing financial aid, logistical support, helping to make sure those programs have what they need to succeed.
Right, because a good program without funding is, well, it's not much of a program at all.
Exactly. And then beyond even that, there's the crucial work of supporting good governance and tackling corruption.
Because even with the best programs in place, if corruption is rampant, it undermines the whole effort.
Absolutely. It's about building trust in institutions, making things more transparent, and ensuring accountability at all levels. And that's an area where the international community can really make a difference, providing technical expertise, supporting anti-corruption initiatives, and, using diplomatic pressure when necessary.
So it's not just about throwing money at the problem. It's about being strategic and targeted with how that aid is used, making sure it reaches the people who need it most and is actually used to create lasting change.
You've hit the nail on the head. And what I find really encouraging is that this report, despite everything we've discussed, actually ends on a note of cautious optimism. It acknowledges the immense challenges, but it also emphasizes that real progress is possible with sustained, coordinated action.
Okay, so it's not a hopeless situation. There all is a path forward.
Absolutely. But it requires a real shift in perspective. We need to move beyond seeing this as just a Nigerian problem. It's about recognizing the shared responsibility we all have in creating a more peaceful and secure world.
So where does that leave us, the listeners? What can WE do with this information? It's easy to feel overwhelmed when you're talking about these huge, complex global issues.
It's true, these issues can feel incredibly daunting, but that message of shared responsibility is also a reminder that we all have a role to play, no matter how small it might seem. And it starts with staying informed, educating ourselves and others about these complex challenges.
Because burying our heads in the sand isn't really a viable solution, is it?
Not if we want to see real change. But beyond just staying informed, there are tangible things we can do. We can support organizations that are doing critical work on the ground in Nigeria, whether it's through donations or just helping to raise awareness about their efforts. And we can hold our own WN leaders accountable, pushing for policies that promote peace and stability, both domestically and on the international stage.
So it's about recognizing that even though we might be miles away, our actions or our inactions have ripple effects that are felt across the globe.
Precisely. This report on small arms in Nigeria is just one piece of a much larger, incredibly complex puzzle. But by taking the time to understand those complexities, the connections, the potential solutions, that's how we start to create real change.
That's a powerful thought to end on. And on that note, we're going to wrap up this deep dive into the world of small arms and light weapons in Nigeria. We've covered a lot of ground today, but hopefully you're walking away with a deeper understanding of the challenges, the potential solutions, and most importantly, the role we can all play in creating a more peaceful and just world.
Thank you for joining this vital discussion on the proliferation of small arms and light weapons in Nigeria, implications for national security, and the way forward. If you found this conversation insightful, let's spread awareness. Hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you stay informed on future content. This is a message that matters. Share this podcast with your network, because building a safer Nigeria requires all of us to act. Together, we can spark the conversations and actions needed to address this pressing issue. Meanwhile, feel free to suggest a topic for our next discussion. See you in the next episode.